Today we're going to use the Tele neck template to prepare our neck blank for all that we need to mount the fretboard that we did in the last episode. All right, before we go into part two, let me answer a couple questions that I was getting from part one. Part one was talking about the fret slot cutting template and the fretboard template. And the most popular question that I had was in regards to the auto alignment fret slotting template. I didn't show the use of that template, but I did on a prior video from maybe about a year and a half ago. The how does it work question should be answered in that video, and if you don't, contact me directly and I'll try to explain it. But there has to be very specific offsets of the alignment pins based upon the saw that you're using, so that's why it has to be set up for the saw. So what I did is I developed a standard, and I'll show you a picture here on the screen so you can see what that standard is. The standard will be an indexing pin of 1/16 of an inch in diameter, offset from the center of the blade to the center of the pin by 1/2 inch to the left. And if you're looking to order the Burns saw, what I would recommend is have Jim install that pin 10 millimeters up on center from the base of the sliding table. Now, if you are going to be building your own system, then I would say stick with those dimensions that I just laid out, and then you can use my auto alignment fret slot cutting template without any modifications. The other question, more of a comment, came from Mike, and he was talking about, do you have just a basic package, a kit of the Tele Maximum Guitar Works templates, rather than ordering everything a la carte and being just having that be a little confusing. And so the answer is yes, I put one of those together, and you'll see that in the information below the video for what that kit is. And that kit basically includes a neck template, a fretboard template, a pick guard standard configuration, a neck pocket template that also has some extra routes just in case you're doing a drop top design. And the fifth piece in that basic startup kit, bare minimum things that you would need to build a Telecaster, would be this template, which has got the profile, the standard pickup configurations, cavities, and it even comes with the push blocks and mounting hardware to use this when you're routing out that 1 3/4 inch body for safer and more consistently accurate results. So those 5 things complete as part of that kit, and you'll see that now listed in the information below this video too. The other thing I forgot to mention in the last episode is when you get your templates, they will all have the paper on them. That's why sometimes they look brown. Someone thought it was MDF, but it's not. It's 1/4 inch acrylic. And the back is easy to pull off. Basically, you just get one edge up and the thing comes off just all in one easy strip like that. And that would be the bare minimum to remove. And that way, any double stick tape that you need is going to stick to that, and then your wood just fine without the paper on there. The front is a little bit trickier because the laser etches information, guidelines, and things like that into here. So we have to remove the pieces all separately. When you go to remove those, I think you'll find that a straight razor blade is your best tool for the job. You can just slide it under just to lift the beginning part up, and then you can just pull it straight off, and that'll be the quickest and easiest way to get all that paper off. Part 2 of this series, working with the Maximum Guitar Works templates, we're going to use the neck template. All right, the neck template will be used to create the Telecaster neck out of whatever your neck blank is. Now let's talk about that real quick. First off, my neck blanks I've standardized on 4 inches wide by approximately 3/4 inches thick. I say approximate because the fretboard combined with the thickness of the neck has to equal 1 inch. All right, and these are about 28 inches long. Your dimensions can vary a little bit. I think the Telecaster neck could fit on like 3¼ inches. The Strat may take pretty close to the 4-inch, maybe 3 3/4 or something like that. But I like to start with a full 4-inch because with my headstock template, I can get that to run center line on that board, and that to me is the most ideal situation. But you can certainly offset it to one side or the other and it would be fine. So the first thing to do is to prep your board like you normally would. And I won't go into that, but you know, it's flattening, squaring everything up, and making sure that your blank is ready to go. The next step is going to be to pencil out the dimensions of the template and everything that's going to be going and routed into that neck blank. So what I'll often do here is I'll lay this out, I'll put a center line on there, I'll then locate where my neck is going to be. For me, it's on the center line, and then I'll begin to draw out where each of the components are going to be, where the nut is going to be, the basic shape outline, and I'll put all of that on the piece of wood. So once I got that basic shape drawn out on there, I can begin to lay out exactly where the different components are going to be. Okay, so where my truss rod is going to be, and I can mark that out. If I'm going to be using carbon fiber, I want to figure out where are those going to fall into here. Okay, what type of distance do I want away from that? And all of this I've talked about in previous videos, but you basically lay all this stuff out and you draw the lines of where they're going to be, and then you can go to the router table and you can route out all these channels. For the sake of time, I am going to reveal that the other side was already done. So I did all my routing, so I've got my truss rod slot in here, I've got my carbon fiber slots in there. These are going to get epoxied into place. Okay, this I validated that the truss rod fits perfectly in there, just slightly, ever so slightly below the surface. So now my neck blank is ready to go. Now, when we talk about actually drilling the index holes with the template on here, the reference pin holes, we want to wait until after this routing is all done. The reason that we do this, if you're using like a router table or even a hand router to do these slots, there's a chance that it may not be as dead center as you thought it would be or as you want it to be. So I'm not going to drill the alignment pin holes until I'm certain that this is set in stone or wood. Then I can come back and take my template and I can line it up ever so perfectly onto here, and then I can drill my holes. Does that make sense? So at this point, I know what the parallel axis is, even if I was slightly off in doing it left or right or slightly cockeyed. It doesn't matter at this point in time, because now my template is gonna validate the longitudinal straight line, and then we will put the indexing pins, the alignment pins, and drill those holes so that we can use those pins for perfect alignment from here forward. Now I've got that fretboard on here ever so perfectly where that center line of the template is riding right down the center of my truss rod. And I can easily see that because all these fret marker holes, I can see whether it's perfectly centered in that route going right down the center. And that's what I'm going to set it up for. At this point, I'm ready to drill the holes, the alignment pin holes, and that's going to now solidify this neck blank in that axis. All right, the depth for these alignment pins isn't as critical as the underside of the fretboard, but I'm still going to not go too deep, so I'm going to limit it to maybe 3.5 to 4 millimeters should be more than enough. I ended up getting my little brass pins in since the last video. And I'll tell you that these pins are a tight fit for sure. A lot tighter than the wood ever was. So that'll be more accurate, and what will require to make sure that my precision is right where it needs to be. So since I'd already traced out the neck template, I can see that this is going to be a perfect alignment right on the edges. So I'm feeling pretty good about this, so we're going to go forward. All right, there's a lot of different orders of operation that you could do, and I'm just showing you one way to use these templates. It doesn't mean it's the way you have to do it, but the order of operations that I'm going to do first is I'm going to actually take this to the bandsaw and I'm going to cut off the extra headstock area. I want to leave ultimately about 14.5 millimeters. It's about 9/16, so a little bit under 14.5, but I'm going to shoot for about 14.5 after sanding. And so therefore I'm probably going to stop about 15 millimeters on resawing with the bandsaw to cut this area out here. There's other ways you could do that process. I just find the bandsaw to be the quickest process there. So I'm going to draw myself a line right on 15 millimeters and then take it to the bandsaw and cut it out. On my template for the fretboard, I leave an extra 15 millimeters, a little over ½ an inch on the front side of the nut, just for room for that swoop in the drum sander to kind of create that swooped area, and I have enough room to kind of clear out and get a nice round finish between the neck and the fretboard. So I'm going to take this back probably only about 3/4 inch from the nut line in this particular case. So again, order of operations can vary, but I'll try to explain why I'm doing what I'm doing when I'm doing it. I find that cutting off this extra piece to get it a lot closer, so I have very little sanding to do, is a lot easier on the bandsaw than any other way that I've done. And it is a lot easier to cut off that area when I still have a square edge, and that's why I do it at this point. Now, sometimes I'll take my templated tracing of the main body and I'll cut that out now. Or sometimes I'll glue on the fretboard first, and then I will use that as a guide to cut on the bandsaw and then flush cut with the router only the body section. And I think I'm going to do it that way now, because really once I glue on the fretboard, I can take it to my drum sander and I can create this flat swooped area here of the 1 inch radius, and I can do it all with still a square edge intact. So on my drum sander, it gives me a lip to kind of guide it in and out and helps that swoop to be perfectly perpendicular to the neck itself. So I'm going to do it that way. So I'm going to pour some epoxy in these 2 channels, spread it around a little bit, and then squeeze the carbon fiber reinforcement tubes into place. Any extra epoxy kind of going to the surface, I'm just going to wipe off with a little acetone, and that'll help clean the wood before we glue on the fretboard. And just out of good practice, a little quick wipe on the bottom of the fretboard will help ensure a good glue joint. More important with very oily woods, but it'll work out great here too. Okay, a quick test, and you should do this dry also, but with just finger pressure I can see all the gaps closing up. So I'm going to take it to my vacuum clamp and I'm going to put this in the clamp for about an hour, and then we'll continue this work a little later. So what should we do while we're waiting for glue to dry? Have a little beverage. This is a countdown timer. I picked up a couple of these. I think they're for like kids and scholastic endeavors. And anyway, I have them around my paint room. I've got them at my glue up station and different places around the shop when I have timed events. So I set this for 1 hour, and when that red light goes off and the buzzer goes off, I know that it's done, because I lose track of time, and sometimes I don't know, when did I put that on? And is it 30 minutes? Is it an hour and 30 minutes ago? So this is a way I kind of help from losing my mind and not remembering things that are going on. I mean, I think really you're ready just to start jamming out some and see what these are capable. Oh, that was good. These are my favorite whiteboard markers. I had a set of these that I bought like 12 years ago when I was coaching my daughter's basketball team. And I had it with the little basketball whiteboard, clipboard thing. And 10 years later, I found these in a box somewhere, and they still worked. Hello? 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 Oh, sweet, my order shipped. Hey, just got a text from Matt over at Texas Toast. He likes my photo shoot area that I built in the shop. Blueberry, my favorite. Okay, it came off of the vacuum press, so the fretboard is all glued on. I've got a nice little bead of glue out the edge on all sides, so I know I got a really strong joint there. Traditionally, I'll let it sit overnight at this stage before we start working on it, but it'll be fine for what we're going to do here, so I can finish up this video and show you the rest of the steps in order to use the template process. And again, the focus is the templates. So at this point, the only thing we use the template for on the neck side is to drill the holes that line up with the fretboard so that I can glue that into place after the carbon fiber and the truss rod were placed in there. Now, while the edge is still square and straight, I'm going to use the Burns drum sander. Now, this is the special drum sander that I had modified. Look in one of my old videos, you'll see the difference between the two. But one of the things it has is these rails on the side, and it has a 2-inch diameter drum rather than 2.5, so that gets down to the traditional spec of that little swoop on the headstock with a 1-inch radius. And while that's still square, I'm going to actually sand this down to final specs. Jim told me the other day that he sold about 50 of these modified drum sanders for other guitar builders based upon the video, and he's going to be linking the video on his website. But I don't get any commissions or anything like that. I just think it is a great tool with a very specific purpose that does a great job. So I just basically created that 1-inch radius right there, and if I go back and measure, remember what I was looking for, 14.3 to 14.5. I'll measure the four corners, 14.35, 14.39, 14.4, 14.35. That's within 10 thousandths of an inch over all those four corners. I don't see anything where you can get better than that. Okay, the next thing that we have to do to get ready for the next use of the template is we're going to have to bandsaw the body. Just the fretboard area we are going to bandsaw out and keep the headstock area there for now. And this is what we want as we approach the router table. We know our fretboard was done with the template. We know the fretboard is perfect. Now the fretboard becomes the template for flush cutting the body of the Telecaster neck. You're saying, Steve, I know how to route. You know, let's get back to the template. Okay, well, I'm getting there. I honestly am getting there. But we had to do this part. Now, again, there's more than one way to do the job. So if you want to do it differently, that's fine. But this is the time now that we are going to transfer the template to the back side. Now, up until this point, we don't have our alignment pin holes in the back. We only had them in the top. So that's why I had you flush cut the body of the neck in order to transfer the template. Now, when I take the template and I put it on the back, and okay, here's another tip for you. When you transfer it to the back, you should not be able to read the wording. If you can read the wording on the back, then you're about to create a reverse headstock, which is cool, but may not be what you want. So it'll go that way. So here's how we're going to transfer it. I'm going to make sure the end is absolutely flush. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to feel any deviation whatsoever. And then we are going to double stick tape this template into place and make sure that we force the alignment with a couple clamps. So one thing that I can do is I can now drill a couple positioning holes, alignment holes here, but be very careful because at this point you only have the capability to go maybe 4 millimeters deep before, depending upon your neck dimensions, before you may start drilling the holes deeper than what you're going to carve out when you do the neck. So I'm going to limit myself to 3 millimeters, no more than 3 millimeters, just a little less than 1/8 of an inch deep on those alignment holes. The template is going to be perfectly matched all along here, but sometimes if you put the template directly on here and you start routing and there's any shifting whatsoever that takes place, then what it's going to do is right where this nut area is, it's going to make a ever so slight gouge in those areas if there's a little sponginess to that template at all. Now there shouldn't be because of our locator pins, but just to be safe, what I like to do is just take a layer of tape, maybe 2, into only that final curve area. And what that will do, if there's any deviation of the template whatsoever, it will make just a little tiny hump larger, and it's easier to take down that short little hump with a file or sanding beam or something like that, as opposed to trying to level a gouge all the way down the entire neck and making the neck too thin. So this is not always necessary, but it's a safety precaution that I like to do. Now you'll notice when I drilled the holes, I only drilled the holes up around the nut area. I did not drill the holes, the alignment pin holes, in the heel area. And the reason is because this is the final thickness, so they would be visible. Now, they would be in the neck pocket, so the only person that would know is you, but they would bother me just being there. So I am going to use this area for the strength and lateral stability okay, which is the only place I'm really working at. And then down on this end, I'm just going to keep a clamp in place, and that will hold it, the bottom, the heel side, from shifting at all. Remember the technique for the fretboard? Going to do the same thing here. I'm going to slide my alignment pins down in there before the tape makes contact. And also, I'm going to put a little tiny pressure, centering pressure down that side, and then I can drop this whole thing down. Okay, in my storytelling, I forgot to do one thing, so let's back up a little bit, but I'll make this work, but just so that you understand. Once I align this perfectly in place, then you should draw this out and take it back to the bandsaw and cut it as close as you're comfortable with to that line. 2 millimeters is my goal. In this case, I've already taped the template into place. I'm not going to take it back off. So I'm going to go to the bandsaw now. I'm going to cut this out, but I'm going to be very careful not to screw up my template. If I screw up the template, then it'll give me an opportunity to show you how I repair templates, but I was planning on doing that later and not today. The bandsaw procedure was pretty touch and go there for a second. No, not at all. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so now we're going to route this out. Now I am using that 2-inch bit that I talked about in the preceding video, and when it's in this position and I'm using the bottom bearing, it's pretty scary having that much blade sticking up. So just be real careful. A shorter bit would definitely be better in this case, but this will most definitely do the job. I did keep my clamp here just to hold that template square, but I don't expect any issues. Now remember, when routing relatively small pieces like this, a push block is your friend. Just keep your fingers away from that blade. Anytime you need support close to where that bit is cutting, just use a push block. All right, so we are right where we need to be. We've got this neck fully profiled. Is that a better view? Fully profiled to exactly my Telecaster neck design. All right, now, before we take the template off, it's not a bad time to either mark or drill the holes that we need in here. So I do this slightly different than the standard design that a lot of manufacturers use. A lot of manufacturers will use like a 10 millimeter hole all the way through. The majority of the modern tuners out there require, okay, I shouldn't say require, but they're best installed, in my opinion, with a step procedure. With the center, and this is like a standard go-to, my hip shot that I use are all the same specs. The top post actually needs a 5/16 hole, or thereabout, it's roughly 8 millimeters. And then the back side of the machine requires about 10 millimeters to go all the way up flush. So what I do is I drill the 5/16 inch hole all the way through first, and then use a reaming bit to go from the back to the front. All right, so if you want to make a 10 millimeter hole all the way through and use it that way, that's perfectly fine. I just choose to do it this way. So here's my recommendation to you, is I could take this to the drill press and I could drill out these holes in the neck very easily. Okay, now eventually it will begin to wear away that template because there's a cutting edge. If you use a Forstner bit, it's a little bit safer on the edges, so it'll do a little bit better. But instead, the best thing to do is really just take the brad point and use that rotate around, and that will mark the center, and then we can remove the template and do all of our drilling without the template in place to preserve the accuracy of all of those holes. So this is a perfectly accurate way to mark, and then I'm going to accentuate it just a little tiny bit to make it easier to see. Let's go ahead and remove the template at this point. So the brad point made a little dimple in these, and just so I can see it better when I go to the drill press, I'm going to take a lead pencil and just rotate it in there just to lighten it up, just for some contrast, so I can see the center of that hole a little bit better. Let's go drill some tuna holes, huh? Was that a Boston accent? I don't know. I think it was pretty far off. It was a combination of Southern and Boston. Now, before you drill any holes, really double check your tuners and what the specifications are. You don't want to drill a hole that's bigger than what you need. Some of the vintage tuners actually need a reaming bit or a step bit going from the front to the back. So double check these things. So we're going to go all the way through. So I'm going to set my stop just to the top of that piece of wood there, and this will be my backing piece, and I will drill down very carefully into the dead center of the holes that I made with the same brad point bit. Now, besides looking very cool, these magnification headlamps really help to identify precise things. Even if you're under 40, these help. Okay, if you're over 40, it's almost a necessity. But it does look cool. Okay, what I like to use for the 10mm step on the back side of the headstock, in the case of using Goto or hip shot tuners, is this reaming bit from Stu Mack. So it basically takes the 5/16 hole that we drilled and it lines up in there perfectly, and then it drills the 10mm as it goes down until that blunt end hits the surface. And to me, that's the best way to get proper support for the top and back part of the machine tuners. And again, these are common size, so many of them out there, the modern tuners, will be that way. If you have a vintage set of tuners, it may be a whole different thing. You may have to get a different size hole that they don't make a reaming bit for, and you may have to use a step bit. Make sure the back hole is the right size, make the top hole with a step bit, and you may have to do something creative like that, or just make a 10mm hole all the way through. Anyway, the only problem I found with this nice little reaming bit from Stu Mack is the blunt end was actually a 1/16 too tall. So when I used the reaming bit, the tuners would not sit totally flush on the back of the headstock. They just sat off ever so slightly. You could see a line. So I've taken this to my grinding wheel and I ground down. English is a tough language for those who don't know that. I ground down the blunt end about 1/16 of an inch so that I knew that I was going to have plenty of room to fully seat the tuners with a standard 9/16, approximately 14.3 millimeters of headstock. Doing the same thing back to front, except this time we don't want to stop. We want it to stop when it hits, the blunt end hits the surface. I'll turn the speed down. Doesn't have to be that fast, so there's 300 RPMs. You'll not believe how much harder it is to do this with a camera and trying to keep my hands out of the way and hold everything down to show you what I'm doing. But there's the stepped bits from the back, the 5/16 in the front, and that's going to be perfect. And that completes the entire process done with the Maxim Guitar Works templates. Okay, other than radiusing the fretboard, which I will do offline, basically it's exactly where this neck is, except we've got really cool binding on this one too. So that is part 2 of the Maxim Guitar Works template series, the Tele template series, and we have shown you every step and tip and trick in the book that I remembered to say about the neck template itself. Next part 3, we're going to be talking about the super cool body template with the paddle grips. Okay, so we're going to show that and maybe even move on to the neck pocket too, depending upon what order of operations we want to do and what the time looks like. So until next time, remember, no matter what you do, start with excellence.